If you love animated content that breaks down book summaries and dives into fascinating topics, we'd love your support. Creating these videos takes a lot of time and effort, and by subscribing, you help us continue bringing you this valuable content consistently. Your support means the world to us. Hit that subscribe button and join us on this exciting journey. And now, let's continue with the video. Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Chapter 1: The Rich Don't Work for Money. When Robert Kiyosaki was 9 years old, he and his best friend Mike weren't invited to a classmates' pool party because they were too poor. Feeling the sting of rejection from their peers, they asked Kiyosaki's father how they could make money. Kiyosaki's father, whom Kiyosaki calls Poor Dad, was hardworking and well-educated but not financially successful. Poor Dad suggested they ask Mike's dad to teach them instead. Despite not having made it past the 8th grade or owning fancy things, he was a successful business owner. Mike's dad, known as Rich Dad, agreed to teach the boys how to make money, but in exchange, they had to work in one of his shops, earning 10 cents an hour. As the weeks passed, the boys worked, but Rich Dad taught them nothing. Kiyosaki grew frustrated. Eventually, Kiyosaki threatened to quit, furious with Rich Dad for his low wages and for not having followed through on his promise. Rich Dad then explained that he had paid Kiyosaki poorly on purpose to teach him an important lesson. He wanted Kiyosaki to learn the difference between working for money and making money work for him. Kiyosaki wasn't sure what this meant. So Rich Dad explained that he had two options. The first, Kiyosaki could remain in the rat race, that is, the pattern of get up, go to work, pay bills, that most people participate in. If so, Kiyosaki would be like everyone else, accepting low wages, chasing raises and promotions, maybe getting a second job. Or, Kiyosaki could realize that having a traditional job was a short-term solution to a long-term problem. The rich don't become rich by working for money, Rich Dad explained. Instead, they have money work for them. For instance, instead of chasing salaries, they buy assets that go on to generate more cash flow. This experience changed Kiyosaki's life. Poor Dad had always encouraged him to get a good education and job. He now saw this would only ever land him a position as someone's employee. As the years passed, Poor Dad lost his job while Rich Dad grew into one of the richest men in Hawaii. Kiyosaki followed in Rich Dad's footsteps, eventually retiring at 47. In 1997, he wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad to share the lessons that helped him accrue his wealth. 20 years later, it sold 32 million copies and has been published in 51 languages. Next, we'll explore the specific assets Kiyosaki recommends we focus on buying to build our wealth. Chapter 2: Assets and Liabilities. It's likely that few of us were taught financial literacy growing up. We may have learned about history and science in school, but not about taxes, for example. But without financial literacy, it's virtually impossible to become wealthy, no matter how smart or talented you are. Thus, Kiyosaki believes increasing financial literacy is the first step to becoming rich. The biggest lesson of financial literacy is simple: understand the difference between an asset and a liability, and then buy assets. This lesson may seem obvious, but in reality many individuals don't know the difference between a liability and an asset. For example, most people think buying a nicer house is acquiring an asset. Kiyosaki doesn't agree. He says most people work all their lives paying for a home they never own, and that isn't guaranteed to go up in value. And if all your money is tied up in a 30-year mortgage, you won't have the funds to buy other assets or time to grow their value. If we think of our definitions, a house, therefore, can't be a liability. It takes money out of your pocket without putting anything back in. We can see how assets and liabilities work in practice by comparing the cash flows of low, middle, and high-income families. Every family has expenses, like food, housing, and transportation. Families with little income use it to pay for these expenses. Middle-class families with more income tend to spend it on liabilities, like a mortgage, that generate more expenses, like mortgage payments. Now, if we consider rich families' cash flow, we see a notable difference. They put their money into assets. For instance, instead of a house with a mortgage, they might acquire a rental property that generates income in the form of rent. Or they might buy other income-generating assets like stocks and bonds. This money goes back into their pockets and funds their liabilities. According to Kiyosaki, the main obstacle to becoming wealthy isn't how much money we have. It's how we use it. Thus, if people with even limited income focus on putting money into assets as soon as possible, they too can accrue wealth. Chapter 3: Mind Your Business. Rich Dad, Poor Dad. When McDonald's founder Ray Kroc would describe his business, he wouldn't say that he worked in the hamburger industry. Kroc would say that his real business was real estate. He knew that the land and its location were the most significant factors in the success of each franchise. Kiyosaki shares. Today, McDonald's is the biggest single real estate owner in the world, owning even more land than the Catholic Church. Real estate is what made Kroc wealthy. Kroc's perspective demonstrates a crucial lesson. Understand the difference between your profession and your career. Most people think their profession is what will make them money. Someone might study law in order to become a rich lawyer, for example. The problem with this, Kiyosaki explains, is that they spend their lives minding someone else's business and making that person rich. A lawyer at a big law firm might have an impressive salary, but they're mostly making the firm rich. If you see your job as your only income stream, you'll only be able to acquire wealth through your job. This is why many people chase raises and promotions. In reality, if we want to be wealthy, we have to mind our own business. That is, focus on what will make us independently wealthy. The best way to mind your own business is to use your salary to build a career of buying income-generating assets. Some professionals may think they already have assets, but as we saw in the last chapter, this isn't always the case. Cars, homes, or expensive workout equipment aren't real assets. They rapidly lose their value and may require constant upkeep. When picking assets, Kiyosaki recommends we choose things we love, based on advice from Rich Dad. If you don't love it, you won't take care of it. For example, Kiyosaki buys real estate because he loves it. He could tour properties all day, and when problems come up, he's happy to deal with them. His strategy for real estate is to buy small, then continue trading up until he's able to buy larger properties. He holds most properties for less than 7 years. Kiyosaki also loves small companies. He buys stock and aims to be out of stock in a year. Once you start purchasing assets, Kiyosaki encourages you to use the money they accrue to buy more assets. This way the money will keep working in your favor. Chapter 4: Understanding Taxes. There is a reason the rich keep getting richer and the middle class and poor rarely do. The rich don't pay taxes. Kiyosaki further argues that the rich will likely never pay taxes, for a few reasons. First, the government incentivizes business owners and investors to create jobs and housing by giving them tax breaks. Secondly, the rich have enough clout to push back against high taxes. They can hire lawyers or accountants to figure out loopholes. This means the only place for the government to drive tax revenue is from the middle class. The average American has to work 4 to 5 months to cover their taxes. Moreover, the harder one works to make money, the more in taxes one needs to pay. Thus, Kiyosaki encourages individuals to think like the rich and limit the amount of taxes they pay through a few legal strategies. One possible avenue for limiting one's taxes is by forming a corporation. What most people don't know, Kiyosaki explains, is that corporations are not really anything. A corporation is merely a file folder with some legal documents in it, sitting in some attorney's office and registered with a state government agency. Furthermore, Kiyosaki explains that corporations are easy to set up and generally inexpensive if you own investments that produce cash flow. Corporations are useful for a few reasons. The first is that the tax rate for a corporation is lower than the tax rate for an individual. The second is that certain expenses can be deducted from your income before taxes. Board meetings in Hawaii, car payments, and even some meals can be claimed as business expenses if you run a corporation. This means corporations will only be taxed on the sum remaining after their. Another means by which the rich limit their taxes is to familiarize themselves with the tax code. For example, Section 1031 of the U.S.'s Internal Revenue Code permits a seller to hold off paying taxes on a property if they use the profit to buy a more expensive property. As long as you keep trading up in value, you will not be taxed on the gains until you liquidate, Kiyosaki explains. Learning loopholes like this, or hiring people like attorneys and accountants who know of them, can help you gain an advantage. Chapter 5: Make Opportunities. Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Financial success can sometimes feel like a rigged game. We assume only those that draw the right cards can succeed and get ahead. Kiyosaki argues that financial success isn't about naturally having opportunities, it's about creating them when you don't. Rich Dad would often tell him that money isn't real. The rich find ways to invent it, even when they don't have it. If we can follow suit, we can create opportunities where there are none. Kiyosaki shares one example of a time he created money. While Kiyosaki lived in Phoenix, Arizona in the 1990s, the economy was in turmoil. If he had been like any other person, he might have seen this as a sign to save more money. Instead, Kiyosaki looked for opportunities. He went to a bankruptcy attorney's office and found homes originally marketed for $75,000, selling for $20,000 or less. His friend loaned him $2,000, which Kiyosaki used as a down payment for one $20,000 home. As the paperwork was being filed, Kiyosaki put up an advertisement for the house, valuing it at $75,000 and offering it for $60,000 with no money down. That same day, prospective buyers lined up and the house sold in minutes. Kiyosaki asked the new owners for a $2,500 processing fee and handed off the property to the escrow and title company. He returned the $2,000 to his friend, along with an additional $200, and paid the remaining balance on the house. Kiyosaki concludes that he created over $40,000 from nothing in just 5 hours. When Kiyosaki shares examples like these, he's often met with resistance. People will argue that such strategies might work in Arizona, but not in New York or larger cities. Whenever I hear someone say, "You can't do that here," pointing at me, I remind them that maybe the real statement is, I don't know how to do that here yet," he responds. For example, Singapore's real estate market is booming, but one can still find reasonable prices a short drive away. Kiyosaki argues that opportunities always exist, we just need to find them. Applying this frame of mind to all your financial strategies can help you make money more easily. As we saw with Kiyosaki's initial real estate investment, even a little money can go a long way. So, instead of thinking to yourself, "I can't afford this," think, "How can I afford this?" Kiyosaki also recommends turning your attention towards opportunities others might not see. For example, instead of buying a package of investments, look at specific stocks you think will do well that others may have overlooked. Over time, you'll get better at finding opportunities and assessing which will pan out. Chapter 6: Keep Learning. Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Kiyosaki tells the story of an interview he had with a young reporter about his book, Secrets of Being Rich. The writer shared that she dreamed of becoming a best-selling author like Kiyosaki, but that her novel hadn't sold. Kiyosaki suggested that she attend a sales training course. She angrily said that she hated salespeople and didn't understand why he would recommend that. Kiyosaki pointed to his book and explained, "It says best-selling author, not best-writing author." He argued that with her natural talent and newly learned sales skills, she could be a success. The writer refused to take Kiyosaki's advice. She insisted that she didn't obtain a master's degree to become a salesperson and stormed out of the room. The writer's behavior is not uncommon. Most people are wary to change and are too tied to their professional identity. This issue is only compounded by the fact that we're told from an early age to specialize our skills in order to increase job security. We tend to believe that the more specific knowledge we acquire, the more we'll get paid for it. However, this isn't always the case. If you've specialized in something very specific, it can put you at a disadvantage if no one is hiring for that particular skill. Thus, Kiyosaki believes learning a variety of skills is key to growing your wealth. Making money is much easier when these skills can be used in combination, Kiyosaki argues. For example, had the writer considered acquiring marketing skills, she could have become the best-selling author she longed to be. In his own life, Kiyosaki often switched jobs to acquire new skills. He worked in accounting, sales, marketing, and more. He even became a ship's officer so that he could learn more about international trade in emerging markets where they traveled. These skills weren't focused on getting another job or a higher salary. They were skills that would help Kiyosaki become rich. Ask yourself, is the skill you're learning going to give you a leg up in your journey for financial independence? If not, perhaps consider a pivot to another job where you can learn more evergreen skills like sales, marketing, or managing people. By focusing on learning skills that will serve you in the long term, you can grow your career rather than stay tied to your profession. The main ideas, Chapter 6. Focus on skills that will serve you long-term, not just for a specific role. Highly specializing can put you at a disadvantage if no one is hiring for that particular role. Kiyosaki's recommended skills include accounting, investing, marketing, and law. Hit that subscribe button and join us on this exciting journey.